Hello and welcome to Kitchen Table Talks. My name is Toni Austin Allen and I am here with Dr. Roy Austin, author of Definitions for Living, a book dedicated to helping you live more effectively and happily, both personally and in your relationships with others. A number of years ago, Dr. Austin compiled numerous articles which he had written to assist his clients into what is now his book, Definitions for Living, making sense of words and ideas that define our lives. Recently, he and I began sitting at our kitchen table and talking about his book, and we became excited about the possibility of sharing our conversations with others who might benefit from them. The podcast you are about to listen to are the product of the recordings we began making of our conversations. We have discussed the book chapter by chapter and have produced this series of podcasts to accompany the printed version of the book, which is now available as an ebook on various publishing websites. Although we believe you will benefit greatly from the podcasts themselves, you will get the most out of them by purchasing the book, reading each chapter prior to listening to the podcast, and having it available to follow along with our conversations. The ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We hope you enjoy our talks at our kitchen table as much as we have, and that your life will be greatly enriched by having shared our conversations with us.
All right, we're on Chapter 10, How to Make Demands in a Relationship. I'd like to actually ask you, why is this such a hard thing in our culture? Or maybe it's a hard thing in all cultures. I don't know. I only know mine. But seems like there's so many problems and misconceptions about what making a demand is all about.
Well, that's an excellent way to start off discussing this particular chapter, Tony, because there are two major answers to that important question about why it's so difficult to make demands in relationship. First of all, we have seen them done so badly, and badly meaning there are a lot of people out in the world that are really basically very narcissistic and selfish. And the types of demands that they make on other people are really harmful, not only to that person on which they're making demands, but it also is harmful to the relationship itself.
It seems like that's to such an extent, whether it be a personal relationship between parent and child, or between boss and employee. It seems like it's such a problem that the definition, or the word, I should say, the word demand has developed a negative connotation. And
that's the second aspect of it. And that is that so much of our culture has been taught, and a lot of it is from religious beliefs that I think have been misinterpreted. But they indicate, or they intimate that to make a demand on another person or a requirement for a change in behavior is a selfish thing to do. Is that we're taught that we're supposed to always think of other people first. And we're taught that in our culture from the day we're born. And that if you want anything, if you need something from someone else, then if you ask for it or demand it or require it, that you're being a selfish person. You're quote, thinking only of yourself. And so that's the second reason making a demand or a requirement on someone else is difficult, in that we're taught that we should not do that, that we don't really have the right to want something or require something from someone else. And also there is a third aspect making demands in a relationship, and that is there's a risk involved. Is that if you do make a demand on someone else or a requirement of their behavior, you're risking the continuation of the relationship, because someone says, I'm not willing to meet that requirement, and so what are you going to do about it? And so it could mean that if I'm not willing to put up with behavior that's not good for me or the relationship, then that other person may just walk away and not continue the relationship with me. So a lot of times it's fear that prevents us from making demands on people, because we know there's a risk involved of losing that relationship.
Could you, for the sake of not only myself, but I think I understand after we've had our discussions, but I think it might clear things up with the listening audience, because I've heard and watched people's expressions with that word demand, or what they think demand means. Could you actually give a good definition of what that means for you? Because I think in a lot of people's experiences, the word demand, it means that they are going to be demanded, an authoritarian-like thing. And if you could maybe just redefine in a more appropriate way what the word demand really means, not what we have come to believe it to mean.
Yes, a demand is another word for a requirement. This is what I need from you in order for us to continue our relationship, or in order for us to have a good relationship. And here again, you brought up a good point, is that the word demand has been misinterpreted as something authoritarian, punitive, bad for the other person, and that you are somewhat of a slave driver.
And criticizing, poking that person, criticizing them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this is why I wrote the chapter on how to make a demand in a relationship, is to, and I like your use of the word appropriate a few moments ago. Another good word for it is a softer, a gentler way of making a demand, not in that authoritarian, you've got to do this for me attitude, but this is what I need from you in order for me to be really happy in our relationship, and I'd like to discuss it with you. And so it's good to not start off with that kind of authoritarian slave driver type demanding attitude, but just to say, there's something about our relationship I need to talk with you about, and there's some changes in your behavior that I want to ask you for, and are you willing to visit with me about this? So you don't go in like a bull in a china closet and start making all kinds of demands and say, this is going to be my way or the highway. But you start off with a respect for the other person as well, in a non-threatening way of saying, I really would like to talk about our relationship and some things I need from you.
And that really takes us to this next part of this discussion. And on the second page in the book, it says in bold letters, clarify that it is yourself on which you are making the demands. You do have the right and responsibility for determining your own lifestyle, including your physical health, your professional choices, the way you earn and spend your money, and what kinds of relationships you have. And so by clarifying that it is yourself on which you are making the demands, that's how you make it softer.
It is. And it is a very legitimate way of doing it, because I really do strongly believe that what you just read is accurate, in that we need to decide and have the freedom to decide for ourselves what we need from other people in ways that are not harmful to that other person, and also hopefully good for the relationship. And those are two important requirements for making a demand. And we'll get to in a little bit as far as explaining why you're asking or requiring something from someone, to give them a rationale for it. It's not just a selfish thing, but it's something that's good for you and hopefully not harmful to them in any way, and not demeaning to them, and or humiliating to them, but also ultimately good for the relationship. And so it's important to understand that this is what I call a paradigm shift in thinking. Here again, you don't go in as a slave driver of saying, this is what I want from you and you've got to give it to me, but to explain to them the legitimacy of deciding for yourself what is good for you in a relationship. And of course, you respect the other person's right to do the same thing with you, to make demands or requirements of you as well. It's not a one-way street. So every relationship, to be healthy, has to have this openness to negotiating for change from time to time, or otherwise you just have to be willing to live with what you get and put up with it. And I've never known that to be a good relationship. It never turns out well.
You know, it reminds me a lot, as a past piano teacher, I noticed a lot of confusion in my students between the difference between criticism and constructive criticism.
Mm-hmm.
And I would get some students who were never given either, because the teacher was so non-confrontational that they would just pass them on their pieces, and there was no growth, there was no skill building. Then I've got other students from other teachers, and I'm not saying that I wasn't guilty of either of these, because I certainly was at times, but others that came scared to death because everything they did, they were criticized. They were made terrible demands on. You must have this by next week. If you don't, you're out of my studio, you know. But then there's the constructive criticism that is a kind of a working, malleable, growing kind of analysis and skill building that is really helpful, and we don't think of that much in our own relationships.
But it is exactly the same in a business relationship like you just described, as well as a personal relationship. And it has helped me in the past, and as I explained it to my clients and other people, is that I like to differentiate from in the way that you just described it, between criticism and critiquing.
Critiquing, yes.
Yeah, and critiquing is important, but most people were reared in a world of criticism in the sense of being shamed, made to feel bad about themselves, put down, made to feel less than or unworthy of being loved or cared about. And so a lot of criticism is just to hurt the other person, but critiquing is totally different. It's the opposite of that. It is evaluating and analyzing someone else's behavior as well as your own for improvement, not only for the individual, but for the relationship. And so it's important when we are critiquing someone is that we do not attack them as a person to make them feel bad about themselves, but you are evaluating the behavior for the purpose of improvement, which will benefit them, even though they may not see it at the time or want to have to admit it, and also to benefit the relationship. So criticizing, as I like to differentiate it, is just to make people feel bad about themselves so you feel better about yourself or you feel superior or powerful with them. It's a very selfish thing to do. But critiquing is a loving, caring thing to do to evaluate someone else's behavior for the purpose of their improvement and the improvement of the relationship.
But as you said, there is risk because that other person may not understand these two differences in the definitions of criticism and critiquing. And so it is a real risk that you take.
And no matter how well you do it or caringly you do it or how much you explain what we've just been talking about, this is for the benefit of the relationship. The other person still may say, well, I appreciate the approach that you're taking, but I'm still not willing to make that change. So where do we go from here? And this is where we get to in a few moments in the step-by-step process, is that you do have to include the consequences to the relationship when a person exercises their right of choice and says, no, I'm not willing to make that change. And so what are you going to do about it? And you need to have thought that through, whether it's going to be something you can live with and tolerate in the relationship, or whether it's important enough that you can't stay in the relationship anymore. So there is that risk. No matter how well you do it, the other person may say, not going to do it. And so you may have to walk away from it, or they may walk away from you.
And I like right before you get into these skills, I like what you say. To use these steps effectively, both of you need to operate from a foundation of maturity. You must respect each other's right to ask for what you want, as well as their right to suggest negotiation or simply say no to what is being asked. I mean, that kind of sums it up right there. I like that you set this up of in most of the chapters that we've read thus far, you set it up to say, here's how you have to be, or you really need to be at this place before you can do this.
And that should be negotiated, which it rarely is, as we know, right up front or in the early stages of the relationship. Is that the hope is that you are going to interact either on a business level or a personal relationship level with someone who is mature and grown up and sees the value and the necessity of making changes from time to time to please the other person. A lot of times people will get in relationships, they will, quote, fall in love with someone or see someone as a friend or business partner, but they don't really have a way of testing, or they're not willing to test the maturity of the other person or really examine their own level of maturity if they can approach the relationship as adults and have this understood from the get-go, as we say, is that we're going to have to respect each other's rights to ask for things that we want that may require changes from each of us from time to time. And hopefully that other person will be mature enough to say, well, yeah, of course, that's an important part of it.
You would be lucky to find that.
But you'd be really lucky to find someone that mature. And so that's why so many relationships are, they end badly or they just continue badly because they don't have that understood up front. And you're dealing with two immature people who are not willing to approach it as adults and practice good demand making in the relationship.
Well, when you laid this out, you laid it out in such a way, the first 5 steps are when you're asking for change, and the next are when you are being asked to change, and they're definitely flip sides of the same. Would you like to take them in order the way they are on the page, or would you like to do them one and one and just kind of show the flip side of each?
Well, let's do them one back and forth, one by one, and it will show the reader and the listener how these work together, because they are two sides of the same coin. And so both people, I've pointed out, have the responsibility of doing their part in making this work well. So if one person doesn't know to do their part or just forgets to do their part, then the other person has the responsibility to fill in the gaps, and we'll get to that in just a minute. so that the system works well because both people are contributing to the process. So let's go through this just as an example.
Sure. So the first one is when you are the one asking for change. And number one is describe to your partner the specific behavior you want. Avoid extensive complaining about the behavior you do not like. Place emphasis on what you want from your partner.
Now, the other person to whom this person is speaking and asking for a change, this person has to allow that partner to express his or her request without interruption. Mm-hmm. And that's a real temptation, is that when someone is saying, I really need you to make some changes, and you start expressing your complaints or your dissatisfaction and ask for a change, sometimes it gets very threatening, and so you start defending yourself or counterattacking or criticizing the other person. Well, I know you don't like this about me, but let me tell you what's wrong with you. Or we start justifying our behavior. So we start backpedaling and trying to take control of the conversation instead of listening to the other person who is asking for the change, and don't interrupt them and let them complete their thoughts.
Okay. So number two would be ask your partner to feed back your request to ensure he or she heard you correctly.
And the listener has the responsibility to, as I've said here, to provide feedback to make sure you've heard the request clearly. So this requires that the listener listen very carefully to the request and be willing to say, well, let me make sure I've heard you clearly. This is what you're wanting me to do differently. Is that correct? So it's your job to provide that feedback to them instead of saying, no, I heard you. I know what you want. But without actually proving to the other person that you did hear them correctly.
So it's okay to ask them to say it back. You know, it seems a little awkward, but it's what's necessary, I suppose.
It's crucial, yes, because a lot gets lost in translation, mm-hmm. and we take it for granted on both sides that this person is understanding clearly and listening to me clearly what I'm asking for, and then the one who's being asked to change assumes that they understand it. And they don't bother to prove it to themselves and to the other person. So that feedback is very, very important, of saying, okay, let me make sure I hear you correctly. What you're wanting me to do differently is yada, yada, yada. And more often than not, you'll get it wrong or get part of it wrong or use the wrong intonation or the wrong inflection or the wrong attitude, or even if the words are correct. And so you have to really work on this second part of the request for some time to make sure that both of you are on the same page as far as what's being asked for.
Yeah, and what I've experienced with people is that you might be saying it with one intention. You might be saying it very clearly and nicely, but that other person, because of their past experiences, hears it in a completely different way.
Absolutely. It happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Number three, clarify your rationale for the request and how you believe it will enhance your relationship. It is also important to inform your partner of any negative consequences should he or she choose not to change. And that sounds rather harsh, but without it, we're kind of just putting things out there, and it's very vague of how important it is to us, whatever this change we're asking for is.
And that is true. And the listener has the responsibility that if the rationale is not given, the reasoning behind it, and also the consequences that are involved in it, what's at stake here, if they're not clarified by the original speaker, to ask for that clarification. You can say, well, I'm not really sure why you're asking this of me. What's what's the problem here? How is this an issue between us? And also the other part that says, well, yeah, I need to give that some thought, perhaps, before I'm willing to say yes or no. But I'd also like to know how important this is to you. Is this a deal killer? Mm-hmm. Does our relationship depend on whether I make this change or not? Or is this just more of a request that you're willing to live with if I say no? Paint the whole picture here for me, because I don't understand what's at stake here.
I understand when there's something more at stake, but if it's, let's say your partner leaves dirty clothes all over the floor, and you're requesting that they not do that because it really is bothering you. I don't understand quite how you deal with consequences like that, because once you add consequences, it seems to up the game and might offend them. It's like, you're gonna do that if I don't pick up my laundry? How do you work with smaller things? That aren't so big.
Well, it's touchy territory. Mm-hmm. Because it may not be what I call a deal killer. It may not. The relationship's continuation may not depend on whether they do that or not. But I think it is important, first of all, to take the big picture as well. Mm. Is when you're asking someone for a change and they say, I don't want to do that. Or if they say yes, but they don't follow through on it, mm-hmm. like picking up their clothes or something, then you're dealing with a deeper issue there.
I understand.
Of what's going on here. So this is where you lay the request aside temporarily and say, Bob or Betty, I've just asked you for a simple request here that's really important to me, and I've told you that it really would mean a lot to me, and you're saying you're not willing to do that. Is there a problem here that I don't know about? Is this something that you're doing out of rebellion against me, or it's just that you don't like having that responsibility and you want me to take care of it for you, or you just want to see me as your maid to take care of something, or are you angry at me for something? What's going on here? What caused you to say no to what I'm asking for?
So it might be a red flag for something bigger going on.
Yes, and it very often is. Uh-huh. And particularly part of that bigger picture is how often do you get that reaction? Mm. It's one thing for a person to say, no, I really don't want to do that. And it may be that I just don't like to wash dishes. Mm-hmm. I'll be glad to sweep the floors and clean the house, but please don't ask me to wash my dishes. That's something I've never liked to do, don't like it. And I'll make up for it in other ways.
That's a whole different answer.
That's another different answer. But then when you get a pattern of no, not no, but hell no, mm-hmm. and you keep getting no's from your partner, that shows a pattern of passive-aggressive behavior that I'm not here to please you much at all. I'm here for you to please me. Or I'm unhappy in this relationship and I'm trying to destroy this relationship and blame it on you. So there's a lot of underground stuff that can go on once someone says no. Sometimes it's just a simple, I don't like doing that, or it's just not something I'm interested in doing. But a lot of times it shows a deeper current of dissatisfaction or unhappiness in the relationship that has to be examined.
Boy, that's very, very helpful. Thank you for going into that. All right, 4, allow your partner time to evaluate your request. You may wish to agree on a specific time when your partner will give you a response.
And then you express appreciation for the information. You don't get angry or hostile, but you say, okay, I hear what you're asking, and I appreciate you being upfront and honest with me about that. And then you go into the other step of you tell your partner that you'll think about it and get back with them on it, and you keep your word. And you think about it, and if you need more information, you need to talk about it more. You can certainly bring it up in subsequent conversations before you give your answer. But there needs to be a process that doesn't just leave it hanging out there and say, oh, well, okay, I'll think about it, or I'll do better, or something like that. Some vague response without a clear agreement up front. With a time frame around it. I need your answer by such and such.
And it seems like the last one on the receiving end, really, if you could read that first, and then I'll go back and read the final one on the asking, because it seems to go in that order a little bit.
Okay, the last number 6, it says when you're being asked to make a change, then you evaluate the request and its impact on both the relationship and your life. Make your decision and tell your partner what you have decided. Here again, it's a completion process. Is you don't have to rush into it to give an instant answer, yes or no, just to keep the peace, or just to take a stand.
As a reaction,
as
not
a reaction
a response.
to it.
Yeah.
And say, I need time to think about it. But then think it through. And here again, if you need more information about what this is all about, why you're asking me to change, what are the consequences of it, and that may require 2 or 3 conversations. Sometimes you can't do it all in one sitting. And then make your decision, have the courage to say, yes, I will do that. And of course that commits you to it. Then they have a right to expect you to keep your word, because that's going to hurt the relationship if you're not trustworthy. Or have the courage to say, I've thought it over and I'm aware of the consequences as I understand them. And this is something I'm not willing to do, and I'm willing to live with the consequences. And so you have to sort of man up, so to speak, or one up to say, I made my decision, and the answer is no. And then live with the fallout.
Which goes right into the last one, when you ask for change. Says, when you receive your partner's response, A, express appreciation if the response is affirmative, or B, if the response is negative, express appreciation for your partner having considered your request. Then decide whether you're willing to remain in the relationship. Of course, that would have been if the consequence was the termination of relationship.
Right.
Whatever your decision, continue to allow your partner the right of self-determination and refuse to resent or punish him or her for deciding not to change to please you. So there's a lot of maturity there.
It requires a lot of maturity on the asker and the receiver of the request. And there's a really important point here, and that is, if the demand, if it is in fact a demand and not just a request, is made, then it is extremely important to not be bluffing.
Yes.
Bluffing is a highly manipulative technique. So you can say, well, if you don't make this change for me, then I'm just not willing to stay in the relationship with you. And then the other person doesn't make the change. They sort of call your hand on it. It's kind of like a game of poker. And then the other person calls your hand, and then you stay in the relationship, and you're just miserable and you're angry, and but you don't leave. then you've just proven that you were bluffing, and so you lose credibility. So I used to tell my clients, don't mess around with requirements.
And that goes for parents. I think parents are particularly guilty, for lack of a better word, of doing this with their children. And then that creates future problems because the children go, oh, I can get away with a whole lot more.
Exactly. It's very frequent in parenting styles, and it's a terrible thing to do to your child, is to threaten the child but not carry through with the threat. And the child learns that you're a bluffer.
Mm-hmm. Or the parents making a consequence that's not at all possible. Like you're going to be kicked out. Well, that is possible, but huge consequences like you've got to leave the house, when most likely that's not going to happen.
Yeah, and that's when the parent loses credibility, and that empowers the child or whoever in the relationship, in an adult relationship. If you're bluffing, then you're just training the other person not to trust you or to take you seriously. And so you lose credibility, and you have no power to your words if they're not followed by your actions. So I tell people to be very, very careful about making a requirement. You don't mess around with those, because an ultimatum is to be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm. And then, and you talk about that in the very last one as the receiver. Would you read that one just to kind of conclude?
Carry out your decision and accept full responsibility for it. If you decide to change to please your partner, do not resent him or her for what you choose to do. And this is really crucial, is that a lot of times, I'll make a change. I'll do what you want me to do, but I'll make you wish you hadn't asked that of me or demanded that of me. I'm going to make life miserable for you, so I'll get my payback. I'll change, but it's with gritted teeth, and I'll make you pay for it. That's really dirty pool. Mm-hmm. If you decide not to change, accept the consequences of that decision as part of the price you pay for being true to your own values and to the personal demands you place on yourself for a healthy and fulfilling life. So you have the right to say no, but you don't have the right to make the other person's life miserable or be bitter about it, of saying, they shouldn't have asked that of me, and I'm angry, and you play poor me and angry me just because you've been true to your own values. They have a right to ask for what they want, and you have a right to say yes or no. So there's no room for resentment on either person's part. It's just part of doing a relationship.
Well, and you make a good point about that very last part. It's a good thing it's a good thing for the relationship. And if that person who's asking is really thinking about the relationship and themselves, if they do get answers like, well, I'll do it because I feel like I have to, or all right, fine. It's kind of like dealing with a teenager. You take what you can get, but it would be so much better if in that relationship the receiver and the person who says I'll do it would realize, if it's done well, that this is for the benefit of the person you care for. It's for the benefit of the relationship. And in the end, it's probably of benefit to the person who said yes. Mm-hmm. And so to do it begrudgingly is very much like a teenager saying, okay, fine, I'll clean my room. Or even if it's kind of passive aggressive, and I got this recently from a friend. Well, I'll do it for you. I'll do it because you asked. And that doesn't feel good.
And it's not good.
It was something that was really quite fun that we did. And that person said, well, I did it because you asked me to. And there, all of a sudden your stomach clenches and you go, ugh,
It takes the pleasure out of the relationship if you begrudgingly say yes. If you don't want to do it, say no and live with the consequences.
Yeah.
Because that's what an adult relationship is all about. You're not always going to get what you want, so you have to be willing to take no for an answer. But you're also not always going to be able to do everything that you want to do without consideration of your partner's needs as well. So sometimes you're going to need to say yes to someone, but you don't do it begrudgingly. You do it because that's how adult relationships work. If you say yes, I worked with another therapist in my training who's a brilliant lady, and she taught us in one of the workshops I attended. She said, if you do not have the right to say no, your yeses mean absolutely nothing. And I remember that to this day. If you feel like you are a slave and you don't have the right to say no to a request or a demand, then when you do say yes, it's always going to be begrudgingly through gritted teeth. It's a form of slavery. And so that's the whole idea of making demands in a relationship. Both people have to have that maturity to ask for what they want or require what they want and live with the consequences of it. Either they'll continue the relationship and hopefully don't hold it against each other, or they walk away and start over with someone else or live by themselves.
Well, you follow up with an example. I don't know that we really want to go through the example. I really encourage the readers to get the book, and if you haven't already, and read through this example. And I can even imagine, maybe before you make a demand or request of your partner, whether it's business or relational, to kind of see your own way through this and practice.
You practice and you think ahead and you think about consequences and what the rationale for the request is or the demand, and make sure it's not a selfish thing, that it's not harmful to the other person, but it's something that will enhance the situation, and kind of play the scenario and the conversation out in your mind. Rehearse it, and sometimes you even write it down and go over it. Make sure your request is clear and that you anticipate a yes or a no, and what am I going to do if I get a no? Is this a deal killer? Is this something I'm willing to live with without resentment? So it's good to go through this in your brain, thinking it through before you just blurt it out to the other person. You need to think it through because there are some important issues at stake.
And that's a whole lot different than sitting here fretting over it. You really are planning it.
Right.
And creating expectations in your mind of what both responses might be and how will I deal with that in a more responsive way.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's a lot in this. I hope that the listeners understand the need for this. There's a great need because we do have a problem with so many people not wanting to have confrontation, not wanting to step into something conflictual. And really, this isn't conflictual. It's just asking for our lives to be better.
Exactly. It's just part of a healthy relationship.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. And we will start chapter 11 next time, Understanding Expectations.
And that's a big one.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Again, Dr. Austin's ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We look forward to having you join us for our next podcast.